Boy, am I glad that I have found the EA Sports UFC 3 Striking Meta Bible tucked safely out of reach on the EA Sports UFC 3 website. It's Brian, the Apex Gamer Channel, bringing you a video about the problem that I have with recovery in EA Sports UFC and concern with how fighting games usually deal with recovery. So let's jump right into the news and get right to it. And let me put this. Let me be the first to tell you that there is a lot of great information on this blog post. A lot of stuff that you probably didn't know about the game. Some really great need to know information. And it's really hard to discern what it's trying to say exactly. You have to kind of use your best guesstimation. You have to use your best guess when you're reading it, because unless you have King James in your back pocket to interpret this and break it out of Old English, you might not know what it's saying. So for this video, I'm going to take this time to use my best, once again, use the recurring word, guesstimation of what recovery means in the context of the rich, detailed striking system in UFC 3. So let's look at the blog site. On this site, recovery is in these stages. It's in recovery hit, recovery miss, block, recovery hit, block, recovery miss, movement, recovery hit, movement, recovery miss, on hit, on block, and on hit movement. Tricky to understand these, and some of these don't quite matter for what I'm talking about, so I'm going to group them in a way that's more sensible, and I'm going to read you the definition so you can see what you're seeing on screen. I'm going to read those out loud to you. So in the order that they are most practical to me: hit recovery is the number of frames it takes to recover after landing the technique before you're free to perform anything. Bold letters on anything, because that part becomes a little suspect. Block, recovery hit, the number of frames it takes to recover after landing a technique before you're free to block. I'm going to explain that in a second. Movement, recovery hit, the number of frames it takes to recover after landing a technique before you are free to use footwork, head movement, or perform a takedown or clinch attempt. That is one of the ones that is highly in question. On hit movement, frame advantage after successfully landing a technique for the purpose of determining when the opponent is free to use footwork, head movement, perform a takedown or clinch. So this is basically, the way it's written, it's pretty much the same as recovery hit. So it's tricky. That's why I said some of them are useful, some of them I'm not quite there with yet. Recovery miss, the number of frames it takes to recover after missing the technique before you're free to perform anything. Block, recovery miss, the number of frames it takes after recovering a missed technique before you're free to block. Recovery miss, movement, recovery miss, the number of frames it takes after missing the technique before you're free to use movement, head work, blah, blah, blah. On hit, frame advantage after successfully landing a technique. On block, frame advantage after the technique is blocked. So that's a lot. It's a lot of stuff, but most of it is just jargon. But basically, these specific metrics just explain how long before these actions can be performed again for these particular situations. So to be kind and not rude, I dislike a lot of the way this works because of one thing. Recovery to block and movement makes avoiding more useful than blocking and countering. And in mixed martial arts, I know mixed martial arts is a tricky thing to analyze, and what is best for mixed martial arts is very complicated to analyze. But if you watch guys like Max Holloway fight, and then you watch guys like, I don't know, some undercard guys fight, there's very different sensibilities in what they're doing. And the thing that they're doing is there's levels to it. What Max Holloway is doing is at the upper level, and what other guys are doing at the lower level. I'll explain that in a second. I'll explain that as I kind of go on through this whole process. So let's take a look at some of the terms, some of the definitions, the fighting term definitions, and shed some light on the problem that UFC has with recovery. So typically, if you Google recovery in fighting games, this is the definition you'll get. Recovery is the period of time after an attack is executed where characters cannot do anything. This is called recovery. The recovery for several attacks can be canceled or chained into other actions or other attacks. This is the bread and butter combo system of many fighting games. That thing is true for UFC, except for the fact that Recovery is the period of time that characters cannot do anything. Now, if you go back to where we had our initial recovery hit, recovery hit definition, it says the number of frames it takes after landing a technique before you are free to perform anything. Now, we'll keep going as we progress through this document. You'll see where this becomes an issue. So let's look at some other definitions though. Let's go back and re-listen. Let's go back and reread the definitions of the things that are on the UFC site, and I'm gonna give you some context to what they mean in terms of actually in the game, because it is jargon the way you read it. So it says the number of frames it takes after landing a strike before you're free to perform anything is for hit recovery hit, right? This means if you're throwing the same strike back to back in a combo, it's not a combo, but you're throwing the same strike. So it has to see the recovery before the strike can start again. If you're throwing the same strike back to back and it's not a combo, the frames between the start of the strike is initiated is the recovery hit frame. So if I throw a lead hook and it lands and I want to throw the same lead hook again, the amount of frames that are set in this recovery field on the Excel doc, we'll jump to the Excel doc in a minute, but the amount of frames set on the Excel doc is how many frames has to complete before you're able to throw that lead hook again. So let's move on to block recovery hit. That's the number of frames it takes to recover after landing the technique before you're free to block. In layman's terms, this means how many frames after your strike lands before you can block again. That doesn't mean once your strike hits how long it takes from your animation completing and then blocking. It's from when the strike hits the point of starting its recovery. Those frames count down, and that's when you can block again. That's how it works in EA Sports UFC. So once the hook lands, as you hold block, that frame number that's in that field on the Excel doc is how many frames it takes before you can return your hands to your face for blocking. It like they run together. It doesn't end completely and then one start. They run together. So that's a thing that we're gonna work towards a resolve on. The movement recovery hit. The number of frames it takes to recover after landing a technique before you're free to use footwork, head movement. Okay. This means how many frames after your strike lands before you can walk. So you'll see on the doc that's where the problem lies. Because like I said about the recovery to block, it is congruent. It's not after the animation completes that you are able to count down those frames. Like, so if the jab is 20 frames and it hits at 12, but there's 8 frames of recovery and then 6 frames before you can lift your block. That's not how it works in UFC. What happens is there's, like I said, it's 20 frames, 12 to hit, and then 8 to recover. And if there's 6 frames before you can block 2 frames before the recovery is complete in UFC. It's obvious. It's easy to test. It's go to practice mode, throw a punch, and then hold block as the punch is hitting its apex, not before you can feint. Like right after the point where you can feint, and watch how fast your character returns his hands, and then you look at that same strike and wait for the character to finish and then press block, and notice the difference between when your character stops and blocks. And hopefully I will have added that to the video so you can see that right there for yourself as I'm talking about it. So hopefully that's the idea there. Okay, so let's move forward. Let's move forward. We just did recovery miss, I think. No, we did a recovery hit to movement. So let's do miss. Miss is the same thing. We already read the definition for miss, but recovery miss, to me, this means if you're throwing the same strike back to back and one misses, that's the amount of frames it's going to take before you can throw that strike again. And it should be longer if you recover miss than if you just recover hit. Recover miss should have more frames, and I think it does on the doc. We'll have to look at that, and we'll use that as we go on through this dialogue. Recovery miss to block is the same thing. How fast you get your block back up. Recovery miss to head movement, how fast you can move after something whiffs. And that's where the problem is going to lie. So let's go ahead and jump to the next section of this. So when we look at the document, we're going to look at this Excel doc in a second. You'll notice immediately that recovery on movement and on hit, recovery on movement and hit, it's very close in frames. So recovery to movement and recovery to block have the shortest amount of frames by comparison to recover to hit or to block. And that's kind of where the problem is. And that's why most people who consider themselves defensive players have much more success walking away from strikes after they've landed or hit or missed than they do throwing a strike, blocking, and then countering. That's why that works, because guess what? In EA Sports UFC 3, everything is safe on block, with and on hit. Everything. is safe on block. There's nothing in this game that puts you at a vulnerability to being block countered, except for if you throw an overhand and someone throws a lead hook. That's the only thing in the whole entire game that is block punishable. There are some like minute chance. There's a minute chance that if your opponent doesn't react fast enough, they will not block stuff. But mechanically, based around the frames that we see, if you're looking at this and you play fighting games and you're familiar with frame docs and you're familiar with frames on hit, safe block, if you know these fighting terms before I even talked about it, then you know that just by looking at this data, everything in the game is safe on block. So basically, if someone throws an overhand at you and you try to counter that overhand with a straight punch, that overhand is going to recover to block or recover to walking, and you're going to miss that straight punch because it's safe on block. Everything is. So that is the root of the issue. So let's keep moving. So I'm going to explain to you what safe on block means. I'm going to give it to you in the Webster's dictionary version. So safe on block is the phrase referring to a move that an opponent can't punish if they block it. This is primarily determined through frame data and other factors that can affect whether a move is safe or not, such as hitboxes and pushback. Hitboxes and pushback aren't a thing in UFC 3 outside of some seemingly random hit animations that make it hard to combo. So it's like usually when somebody throws a head kick and you hit them with a straight punch, at the end of it, they'll like stumble. And it's like when they do that stumble, you really can't hit them with anything else. And even if you do, it doesn't really seem like it does them any more damage than it would. So that's like, those are just kind of, they look good, they make it look realistic, but they kind of interfere with what's actually happening on screen. So those aren't really pushbacks as much as they are just a caveat of trying to be real and not be a fighting game. So that's just kind of one of those things. It's just an animation. It's like 2K. Everybody say 2K is a game of animations. This is very much so the case here too. So the problem at hand lies in the fact that the game made it to where players are free to walk out of range or free to block, mostly block, but then walk out of range, just kind of tied to it because the frames are so closely related in situations that make countering not mechanically sound. So countering isn't mechanically sound because by definition, in order to counter off of something, you have to have an opportunity to counter, and the frames have to dictate what the opportunity is, and frames are predicated to blocking and or walking. So as a defense, you can't mechanically counter. The counter is sheerly based on your ability to deceive your opponent. There is no mechanical way to counter, and that's a problem in fighting games. Mechanics have to be sound for a fighting game to work. There's no inherent risk if you know that there's only a slight chance that the counter will work. So if you're playing against number 5 player in the leaderboard, he might be more prone to blocking, to dodging head kicks and returning with a straight punch than playing against the person at the bottom of the barrel. But if the head kick counter is the straight punch, that should work against everybody, and that shouldn't be something that's only predicated to someone who made that decision. And like a lot of people talk about body shots not being safe in the game. They say, oh, I land body shots all the time when my opponent's rocked. Well, yes, you land body shots all the time when your opponent's rocked because it's just a mix-up and they're not likely to block their body, but it's not mechanically set that they couldn't block their body in that situation. And in a fighting game, mechanics have to be sound, or else there is no real balance. The balance is just loose, and that's what happens in this game. It's loose. Like, I could be good at blocking my head, so I might be able to stop a lot of the things that you have been training and practice to counter. You thought that they were safe counters, you thought that they were true counters, but they're not true because I block my head a lot. But if you fight the next guy who doesn't block his head a lot, those counters look true. That's not mechanics, that's not sound, that's not balance. That's just edge case that one person will be, from one person to the next, opportunity is different. And that shouldn't be the case if it's a fighting game. Opportunity should be the same. If you jump over a Hadouken in Street Fighter and throw a front kick, a jumping front kick before someone could finish the Hadouken animation, it hits. If that isn't the case, if for some reason that person is just not pressing block, that's where we are with UFC. Basically, you can shoot a Hadouken and block so early in the Hadouken's animation that someone trying to counter it with what seems to be mechanically sound, they can get their hands back up and block it, and it wasn't mechanically sound. That's the problem we have with UFC, and that's the problem a lot of people probably don't even really notice or talk about because they don't have that context of playing primarily fighting games and then converting over to playing UFC, which is supposed to be a fighting game but a real life simulation at the same time, which is completely unfathomable. So anyone who thinks that you can make a simulation fighting game, it's impossible. Literally, it's impossible. And if this game is the closest thing you think to a fighting simulation, you are absolutely dead wrong, because in order for this to be a simulation game, we would have to mirror real life, and real life is so random and varied that there is no way to mirror real life. Johnny Walker can hit you with a flying knee and KO you in 30 seconds, but Jose Aldo can hit you with a flying knee and not KO you. He hit Max Holloway with one and nothing really happened. So there's a lot of variance that makes it hard for it to be a simulation game. So if it's going to be anything, it should be a fighting game first, and the simulation element should be how stamina, how damage, and how, you know, how stamina and damage work, how overall residual, you know, damage works. Stuff like that should be the simulation part of it, because that's how it is in NBA Live. NBA Live, not NBA Live, let's use 2K as a representation. So that's how it is in 2K. The stamina, the strategy, the back end of your character making different decisions because their mood or morale is down. That's simulation. Those things, those intangibles that add elements of realism. Like if I miss 3 shots back to back, I'm obviously not confident that my 4th shot's gonna go in, so I'm less likely to make that 4th shot because I'm not confident. That's where simulation comes in. That's where like role playing and like artificial intelligence kind of takes over. But if it's a fighting game, it has to be mechanically sound or else it doesn't work. So let's move forward. So let's take a look. We're gonna take a look at how this affects the player, and we're gonna use game for this. We're gonna use the rear hook on block, on hit, and on miss, and we're gonna have the other player try to jab out of the rear hook because it's the shortest amount of frames that we saw on the dock. If you look the dock over and spend a lot of time with it, it's the shortest frame attack for all weight classes, because the dock is separated into 3 different weight class sections, and then there's a delta for how many more frames are tacked onto something. It's called execution range. That's for how many frames get tacked on based on your stamina and your stats. So if you have low stats, it'll add X amount of frames to everything you do, because, or to every, you know, every strike has a set amount of frames that it can add based on your I guess striking speed. I don't know. So it doesn't explain it, and it doesn't explain it on the website. So that's my best guesstimation, like I said earlier. But we're gonna use that in game, and we're gonna look at that video. I'm gonna cut that up so that you can see what happens if you try to return a jab after blocking, making a rear hook miss, or being hit by a rear hook. And you'll notice just by watching that clip that the jab won't land in any of those situations. Maybe edge case the jab lands if someone misses the rear hook right past your nose and you throw the jab off, but for the most part it commonly misses. So we're gonna have to look at some other scenarios as well. So noticing that the striking player is able to move out of range of the jab is kind of the problem, or that they're able to get their hands up and block before the fastest strike you can return comes back to them off of block and off hit. And a hook is technically a bigger move. It does take a lot more energy and a lot more wind up. You have to pull back. So that's the problem. If a jab can't be returned before you can return to your block off of a blocked hook, a perfectly seen blocked hook, that's kind of where recovery is starting to fail. That's where it falls apart. So the situation is it's clearly harder one. That is going to be a situation that's kind of harder to see in game in real time versus a person. Like, you're not really going to block a hook online and pop a jab off and have full functionality, because online this game does kind of feel like your buttons are in a jar of peanut butter sometimes. Like, it feels like you're pressing the button 3 times before you ever see it on screen. So that reaction is not going to be as easy. So we're gonna have to look at some different situations. So I'm gonna have the players throw that stepping punch, and we're gonna sidestep that and try to return it with whatever is quickest to return. And we're gonna see if he can get their block back up before we're able to return something actually crippling, because sidestepping should leave you pretty open, right? So we're gonna look at it with just sidestepping a single strike, and we're gonna look at a little bit of it sidestepping a 2-hit combo and make sure that you can still land something off the sidestep. Of course, you're not going to be able to return something similar to what they return, which is the problem at hand. You're not going to be able to return the same energy. You're going to have to shoehorn something small in there just so you're making contact. But we're going to look at that, and then I'm also going to edit together a clip for you of evading a head kick, what it looks like when you block a head kick and try to return a straight punch after a head kick is blocked, what it looks like trying to return after a head kick is hit, and what it looks like trying to return after a head kick is missed, like right at the edge of missed. Even trying to return a head kick back to the head kick as it's missed, you're going to see that in most cases the block can be recovered just before the head kick is able to hit. And I'm going to slow it down and try to show you at the point in the kick's animation, does the block begin to start? Does the block recovery start? That's how I know, like how I was saying earlier, how recovery starts. It's congruent. It's most easily detected when you throw something that's larger and you recover the block while the large strike is going on. You'll notice that the character starts blocking while their head's still down, basically, in most cases. So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at that for a split second. I'm gonna mute my audio and show you those clips, and I'm gonna put on screen text to let you know which one is which, and we're gonna move from there. Okay, so you saw what you saw. Because of this and the way this works, it makes spacing and whiff punishing have like an adverse effect in this game. It's because of the amount of recovery frames the players face with before they can move, block. It's in most cases it's not enough for a proper punish to be returned to the player. So you're not in a bad enough situation for stuff to be recovered. That's something that UFC 2 didn't struggle with. Recovery was not an issue in UFC 2. What was an issue in UFC 2 was, I think, to me, speed of movement versus speed of strikes was an issue. How fast a strike covered distance versus how fast a person could walk out of that distance made UFC 2 just a walk simulator, because anybody who just didn't want to engage could walk. But as soon as they opened up and you were able to whiff punish or block punish or sway punish, if you were able to punish, you could just tie them up in a combination and end their life. But you had to get them to open. And I fought a lot of people who were abusing the fact that walking as a counter was faster than attacking, and they could just walk and then walk and walk and then fire off a body kick as you tried to encroach that space, because you couldn't encroach that distance faster than they can get the body kick off. And that's why a lot of guys walk back through body kicks, because that problem was different than this problem. It's similar because movement is pretty big of an issue here too, but recovering to block and to movement, it has a face now, because we can see the frame data and we can see why this is a problem. It has a face and you can actually point to it. So if I could change anything, I don't like to talk bad about stuff if I don't have some sort of idea of why it doesn't work or why I would like it to work different, because I don't like to bring nothing. I don't like to come to the table with nothing. So if I can change everything, if I can make the frames work the way I think they should work for this game, I'm gonna do it like this. I'm gonna go from section to section, and I'm gonna work my way down, and I'm gonna tell you what I would change about them. So let's start with recovery hit, since that's the order I put them in. Recovery hit, I would keep those recovery hit frames the same as they are in game, because they feel fine. If you throw a lead hook, it hits, and you want to throw the same lead hook, it takes a while before that lead hook can come back out. That feels fine. Recovery miss, I would keep it the same as it is in game. If you miss and try to throw the same thing, it looks fine. I'm going to show that on screen as we're going through this. Block, recovery, hit, I'm going to make those frames the same as they are for recovering to hit or recovering to hit. So what they are currently on the dock, as you saw, are much smaller than the recovery to hit. So I'm going to make, if I can make anything, I would make them the same as the recovery to hit. So if your strike hits, I think that the recovery block frames should start from that moment and be fast enough to get your block up as that strike is coming to a complete end. So as that animation, when that animation would normally fully end, that's when I think the block should come back up. So it would have to be like a deduction or subtraction for it to, so if something's 20 frames, it hits at 12 and it takes 8 frames to recover, then the recovery to block should be exactly the difference of when it hits to recover. So 8 to 10. That way your strike animation fully completes and then the block comes up, and not halfway completes and the block comes up. Because on hit it's cool. It works that way because bigger strikes have longer on hit recovery anyway. So if the recovery on hit is long enough to match the distance of when the strike should have naturally ended, it will make it to where the strike hits, it fully completes, and the block comes up as it fully completes, making it not safe on, it won't be safe on hit. It'll be safe on block, but it won't be safe on hit. So let's move on to the next section, block recovery. I think it's block recovery miss. Yeah, block recovery miss. Make the frames recover to block after the whiff the same as recovering to miss. So in the game, if you miss, currently recovery to miss is faster than regular recovery. So I would make them recovery to block is faster than recovery to miss in the way the frames are right now. The way, if you look at the frame doc, the way it is, you recover to block faster than you recover to miss. I would make those frames the same. That way, when the animation is fully complete, same as for recovery to hit, is when the animation fully completes, you're then able to block again, and not as you're starting to conclude the strike, you're able to block as it is currently. I would just make it to where those frames are more tandem, so you can't whiff something and get your block up while it's still whiffing. You would have to get your block up. Your block wouldn't come up until your character has hit the exact exit of the animation. So for jabs, hooks, uppercuts, those are so small you really wouldn't notice it, but it would open the door up for something similar speed to hit before you were able to get your block back up. Or something like head kicks, you notice from the clip I showed earlier that your head kick block starts to come up as your foot is re-entering orbit. It's on its way back to the ground, but it's not on the ground. What I would like to see is for once that foot hits the ground, then your block comes up, because that opens up such a big window of time for where you're actually vulnerable to being punished. Just to have those frames conclude when the strike completes itself and not be so short that they're congruent and that the strike is actually safe on block. I would have that change to where if you whiffed as the strike ends, oh, hit my microphone, as the strike ends, that's when your whiff starts. So recovery to movement, I would increase the frames on movement to higher values that more closely resembles when the strike animation is fully complete. So the same as the other situations, I would like to add more frames to where you can't actually start moving until the strike animation ends, but I would want that movement to start on hit. I would want that movement to start as the strike ends, as you start to block. So recovery to miss, recovery hit movement, I would want to start as your hands are able to be blocked. So as you're able to block on hit, it's the same moment I would want you to be able to walk. That way, if you land a hook, your fighter hits with the hook and he draws it back, brings the hook back to his shoulder, gets his hands up, he can get his hands up and walk at the same time. What happens currently in game is you can throw the hook, start blocking, and then start walking. Or I think it's like, yeah, it's pretty much like that. It's like you throw the hook, you start walking, and then your block comes up. That's how it works in game right now. It's like walking, then block, but both of them happen before the hook is fully completed. And that's not what I'd want to see. I'd want to see it where the hook has to fully complete before you're able to walk, just because it gives you so much more, it adds so much more realism to the situation. Because in real life, you're not going to start walking as you're hooking. Midway through your hook, you're not going to start walking in a different direction, and you're sure as hell not going to start blocking midway through your hook. You're not going to throw the hook, put your hand up, and block. I mean, of course, you see some boxers when they're doing mitt work, they box like that. They'll tap the mitts, hit it real quick, put their block back up, then hit on the other side real quick. You can't have that in a video game. Having that in a video game just leads to so many other situations where some people should be able to recover that fast, some people shouldn't. So it just opens the bandwidth for it to be something so much more complicated than it's intended to be. So just having it being concrete and understandable is much more valuable for the longevity of something being a fun game to play, or just a mechanically sound game. And that's the problem. It's not mechanically sound. So recovery, movement, to miss. This one's a little trickier, but I would increase the movement frames to a higher value to more closely resemble when a strike animation is fully complete before a player could walk. For the miss, this would be a point when the animation is where the fighter is firmly recentered, where they have their weight over their feet again. That's when I would want them to start walking. So this point after a punch would be when the fighter's hands have reached the neutral position, and a slightly few frames before they can start blocking again, they would start walking. So similar to the way it works in game now, but it would be at the point when the strike has come back. Like if they miss a straight punch and have to draw it all the way back, that's when I would want them to be able to walk again. Not as the straight punch hits, then those frames start. It would be straight punch miss, all frames recovered, then the fighter can walk. And for kicks, I would want the fighters' weight to be fully back on their feet after they miss the kick. Swing a kick, it misses, their feet are back on the ground, hands come up, they start blocking, and they can start walking as well. I would want those animations to be increased to where the fighter can start walking and blocking almost at the same rate, but at the tail end of the strike, which isn't the case in the game. So with all that said, to me, blocking and moving in the current game are just too fast and lead to the game having an uneven balance, and the uneven balance is tipped towards evading, not really recovering, but using recovery as a method to evade. And in my perfect game, that balance will force players to be more conscious with their defensive decisions after striking, and both successfully and unsuccessfully striking. Because if you land a head kick, you're not often gonna walk away. So I don't know why it's an option to land a head kick, and then before the other person is even recovered from the hit reaction, you've already walked and cleared so much distance. It's common that most fighters land something. It's not a good trait, but most fighters in real life land something, and they do something called admiring their punch. And that's an old boxing term. It's like when you land a punch, but before you even draw it back, you kind of look out to see how the punch hit, and then you bring it back. A lot of fighters do that. All the fighters at the highest level, you can see them doing it in little moments. Like they'll land a hook, and as they pull their hook back, they're kind of still hanging on that hook because they're waiting for an opportunity to do something else, but they're also admiring the punch. They'll land that punch and they'll be like, all right, cool, I hit him with that hook. Let's see if he flinches. If he flinches, I'm gonna draw it back real quick and hit him straight. If he doesn't, I'm just gonna slowly roll it back. And that's admiring the punch. And it mechanically, it does make for the game to look more smooth when fighters can start doing stuff sooner. It makes the game, it gives like this image of fluidity, but that fluidity comes at a consequence for recovering being compromised, and the balance of striking, attacking versus defending, and attacking versus countering, that balance becomes compromised when fluidity is put in the forefront in this way. And the way it's put out there, the game looks more fluid, but in functional reasoning, it's not fluid. It's more congested because it's not what it should be. It's something else. And if you play fighting games and you try to play this game, you're gonna immediately run into that wall where it doesn't make fighting game sense, and you're gonna just not want to play it. And that's pretty much where the wall I've hit. Is I know how the game works. I know how I would like the game to work, and I know how fighting games should work. And it makes it hard for me to try to swallow that pill of this is not how the game works and it should. I'm gonna keep playing it. I'm gonna learn it and do it the way it's being done in the game. I'm not willing to compromise my sensibilities for what I know about combat, fighting, and then fighting games. I'm not willing to compromise that sensibility to relearn something that isn't essentially learning the correct thing. Like, I don't want to learn how to stir honey. Like, that's not a task I want to learn. That's basically equating it to that. I don't want to learn how to roll toilet paper. You know, it is a very useful thing to have toilet paper on rolls, but I don't want to have to learn that. That's basically how I feel about teaching myself something that's adverse to the way fighting games should function and the way fighting games function every fighting game has ever functioned in my experience. It's relearning something the wrong way as opposed to learning it the right way. That's like me being southpaw, going into a boxing gym and telling them I'm orthodox. Now I have to relearn all the simple things about boxing that I already know and already can apply to southpaw, instead of just further improving upon my already established skill set. I have to go back and relearn something that is wrong for me. It's adverse for the way my physiological body performs. It's adverse. That is a less sticky situation to explain, but for me to have to go back and relearn something the wrong way is adverse. That's like picking up a left-handed guitar. Yeah, sure, it's a cool skill to be able to play a left-handed guitar or play a right-handed guitar, but I would have to learn something adverse to the way my mind, body, and hands already function, instead of improving upon something that's already established. Like I said, getting better at fighting games, or learning a fighting game that's not like other fighting games. Learning a fighting game that's wrong in the context of other fighting games. That's gonna hurt my progression as a fighting game player in other fighting games when I jump over and I have to relearn the correct systems because I learned the wrong systems for a different game. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you guys can understand where I'm going with the problem with recovery in this game, and understand where I'm coming from in terms of how it should function versus how it does function, because it is a clusterfuck. So until next time, I'm Brian at the Apex Gamer channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you guys on the next one with hopefully some more fun content and less preachy down your ear content. You know what I'm saying? So till then, see you guys soon. Peace. Enjoy your day.